Okay, go ahead and get started.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's really exciting for me to talk to your group. Minnesota has a very special place in my heart, and the research that we did on the Great Gray Owl, because pretty much half of our study area was in northern Minnesota and in the Roseau Bog, Roseau County. So some of the information that you're going to see and pictures you see today are from that area as well. So without further ado, I'd like to pay homage to my former professor and his wife and a very special owl. So I'm gonna think I might can't really control the screen. There we go. Yeah, so on the left is Lady Grail, a tame great gray owl, and her handler Bob Nero in the middle. He was my former professor, and originally from Wisconsin, and his wife Ruth. All three individuals are no longer with us on this earth, but they sure left a big impact, and they created the opportunity for me to move to Manitoba to study the great gray owl back in the 80s. So, look back. So many of you are likely very familiar with the great gray owl because they do come into Minnesota in big numbers. And this is the first one I saw. This was actually I was living in Quebec where I was born, and this bird showed up in the area, and all the students in my lab I was in, we rushed out to see this big, beautiful bird. One of the things that's amazing is the great gray owl. It's so big, but if you look at this picture, it's actually perching on these very tiny, slender twigs, and that's because the bird is quite light. It weighs between 1 to 1.5 kilograms or 2 to 3 pounds, and so they can perch on these quite remarkably slender twigs. The I just want to make sure the sound is working okay. Thumbs up. Yeah. Okay. So the range of the great gray owl in North America covers back up a bit. Here. Try to get back one slide. Well, there we go. And so the range of the great gray owl in North America covers this green belt you see running from the eastern parts of Canada all the way through to Alaska in the upper left. And then its range also extends down into California, as far as south as California and other mountain ranges in the western United States. So it's pretty much a boreal forest, but also it can be an alpine forest specialist. I'm just waiting for the slide to change. Fine. It also has a circumpolar boreal or northern distribution, so it's also found in Eurasia. And the picture here shows the Eurasian subspecies. So it has a slightly different look than the North American great gray, has a much finer concentric rings on the facial disc and more heavily streaked on the breast. Like many of you know, owls don't build their own nests, so they depend on stick nests, and other structures they find in nature. And so I often tell the general public when I'm talking to them that they're either kind of lazy or they're very smart and efficient. So they get the first choice of all the real estate in the spring because they do nest earlier than these stick nest building species. And they also adapt really well to human constructed nest structures such as this one in a tamarack bog. And so we essentially created a network of nest structures that we studied from year to year. They will also use these broken off snags for nests. And when the wood in these broken tops rots out and becomes soft, the owls will dig around in there and lay their eggs in there. This is a great gray owl way up on top of what looks like a nest, but this is actually something called the witch's broom. It's a proliferation of branches caused by a pathogen. And the owls don't know that. They just say, hey, this looks like a sturdy platform, so I'm going to make my nest here. Fire is a really important element to the boreal forest where great gray owls live. And as such, it's evolved to actually adapt to fire-altered landscapes. This is a broken off tree at the edge of a fire where the winds can be so intense that if the tree is weak at all, it often snaps off. And then where it snaps off, that wood gets soft over time and the owls nest in there. So you can see the head of the great gray owl right in the crook of this broken off tree. So they'll nest right in there. Another example of this is near the edge of a fire. You can see a crack in the tree trunk in the middle and the eye of the owl looking out at you. So they're very well camouflaged in all of these situations. This was an interesting bird. We were able to track great gray owls that nested in stick nests where they went the subsequent breeding season. And this bird had relocated quite far up north. This is up close to the Hudson Bay. And the trees in these areas are so stunted, they don't really get big enough for stick nest building species to make structures that great gray owls can use. So we actually, when we walked out to this radio marked great gray owl, we got a signal indicating that it was on the ground and we presumed it was dead. We got closer though, we saw it and it was sitting upright. So I'm not sure if you can see just slightly left of center in this picture on the ground. If you can see my cursor, it's moving around the head of the owl. So the owl was actually sitting on the ground. We thought, this is really strange. What's it doing on the ground? And we got closer and it gave us a very aggressive response. This bird is flicking its nictitating membranes. You can see the semi-translucent third eyelid. And it's splayed the rictal bristles away from its bill, showing you the beak. So that's kind of like a dog raising its lips and snarling at you and showing you its sharp canines. So it wasn't until this bird actually stood up when we got really close and we could see she was actually nesting right on the ground. This is risky. There's a lot of things that will eat great gray owl chicks like this on the ground, but this pair pulled it off anyway. So the bottom line is they're quite adaptable. This is our study area. So you can see here the map of Manitoba, just north of Minnesota, and Winnipeg, which is a city soon to be about 1 million people, and just an hour and a half east of Winnipeg. You're in some of the densest breeding concentrations of great gray owls known in the world, just slightly higher than that of Sweden. And it's quite remarkable because it was only in the 1970s when the great gray owl wasn't thought to be a regular breeding bird in this area. It was thought to be a rare winter visitor, but now we know that it's a regular breeding bird here. So this network of nest structures, that's what all the black dots were on the map. We check those every year. We maintain a certain number of nest structures in order to kind of sample the population. Birds get lured into using these nest structures, and then we can count how many nest structures are actually occupied. And what we found over the years include this data now extends right to current era, but the great gray owl breeding index is essentially goes through a boom bust cycle every 3 to 5 years. And you can see here some years like 1987, it was a huge peak. And other years like 1992 and 1995, there were no birds nesting in our study area. So it's a real boom bust cycle. And as actually Minnesota's famous biologist David Meach once said about predators, if you want to know a predator, you got to know its prey. So within the breeding areas of great gray owls, we actually set out to do small mammal trapping right within the areas that the owls were actually using. So we used museum special snap traps and we developed a grid pattern and we monitored them for 25 years. And one thing I want you to take away from this slide is that red line. The most common small mammal that we trapped was actually the redback vole. And then second most was the meadow vole. And then a bunch of shrews and some other species like deer mice. So the redback vole is really the dominant small mammal in this area. There's a picture of it. They're kind of irresistibly cute. The next step was to look at owl puke. Of course, as you know, owls regurgitate pellets, and in those pellets is a treasure for biologists and kids alike, like picking apart pellets. You can actually identify exactly what prey species they're eating by looking at the tooth cusps of the skull and the lower jaw, and often identify exactly the species, what the owls in this case were eating. What did we find was quite surprising. We found that about 90% of their diet were one species of small mammal called the meadow vole. And you might recall from that 25 years of small mammal trapping, it's not the most common small mammal. So 80% roughly were redback voles. That's what was available to them in their environment, but only 4% redback voles were actually eaten. So they were eating meadow voles disproportionately more relative to the meadow vole abundance. So it really was a diet specialist. And I was asked a question during my PhD defense. Someone said, well, why don't they eat redback voles more often? I said, I'm not sure. I think they might taste bad, but I wasn't willing to try. So, anyhow, here's a meadow vole. I'll confess, this is my only nature faker shot. This is a shot of a dead meadow vole. I put a little blueberry leaf in its mouth and I put a little bit of spit on the eye to make it gleam, but I think it turned out pretty good for. Oh, when we looked at the small mammals, the abundance as it changed over time, and we look at the great gray owl nesting index, we find that the only significant relationship was between the meadow vole and the great gray owl breeding index. So it really is an owl that's kind of ruled by one species of small mammal, one species of mice. They do occasionally eat other things, and when you're picking apart thousands of pellets, like Patsy and I, my wife, who's also a biologist, and you come across something different in the pellet, it's kind of really exciting. So anyhow, up in the upper left, you can see a star-nosed mole. We found relatively few of those. One time only, a bit of a rough grouse carcass, and we're not sure if it was scavenging or if it actually killed the grouse. And then they eat shrews, rarely, but this one in particular is interesting. It's the short-tailed shrew. It's our largest shrew. It's also venomous. So if a short-tailed shrew bites the owl before the owl kills it, the owl will die. If we get bitten by a short-tailed shrew, we won't die. Our bodies are too big, but the poison will cause great pain in whatever limb or wherever it bites you. So it's kind of like eating pufferfish for owls. This owl, this picture was taken in Minnesota, and it's a bird sitting on the backbone and leg of a snowshoe hare. And again, we're not sure if it was scavenging this or if it actually killed it. It'd be a pretty formidable prey item for a great gray owl to take. But this shot came from Quebec, and this is a muskrat. The owl actually killed and hauled up to a tree. So they are big owls. They are capable of killing bigger things. They just don't do it very often. And one day we came across this while trying to catch a live great gray owl perched just above it. And it looked to us like the great gray owl had killed and was eating another great gray. But we weren't there to witness the actual killing. But this picture kind of is more of a smoking gun. This great gray owl is plucking the carcass of another great gray. So it can be owl eat owl out there. But most of the time they get along just fine. They don't eat each other. And in the spring, you can see the female on the left. She's bigger. Like most owls, female great grays are bigger than the males. The male's on the right. And as the spring progresses, they actually approach each other and have intense negotiations, maybe a prenup. And the male then tries to make himself look really attractive by catching a vole, not eating it, flying to the female. It's hanging from his mouth, and he's giving a very deep hoot. It sounds like. And if she's willing to accept him, then she'll fly over and grab that mouse or vole from him And she'll inspect out the real estate within his territory and saying, you're kind of cute, you can hunt voles, but what kind of nest structure have you secured? And then, if all works out, she lets him sit beside her. And you only see great gray owls sitting like this in the spring. And then things progress. The female lays eggs, like most raptors. There's a division of labor. The male is bringing in food. The number of eggs they lay depends in part on the food supply. So when there's a lot of meadow voles, and you can see some half-eaten meadow voles around the edge of this nest, then they'll lay more eggs. And then years when there's few or little meadow voles, they don't lay at all. Grow incredibly fast. Within 3 weeks, they're up to this size, and the oldest ones are actually getting ready to leave the nest before they fly. Again, like a lot of other owls, there's a lot of social interaction going on in this nest. They preen each other's faces. Here's the chick preening the mother's face. She's preening the little guy's face, and things get really crowded. Now, great gray owls, I think, should be the mother of the century, because to help keep that nest from smelling too bad, they'll eat the regurgitated pellets from the young. They'll also eat, for at least in the beginning of the nesting stage, they'll eat the feces of the young. And once or twice a day, they'll fly away from the nest and regurgitate the feces and pellets of their young away from the nest. So the smell is not at the nest. And so quite a dedicated parent. Then sometimes you get to the situation where the youngest chick is left in the nest. They have an asynchronous hatch. So they have big chicks, little chicks, and if there's not enough food, the little chicks sometimes don't get enough to eat. And the male's coming in with food, and he's feeding the loudest chick closest to him. So the little guy will sometimes miss out. But the female will actually fly over, intercept the male, grab the vole from him, fly back to the nest, and then feed those younger chicks. Yeah, they leave the nest before they fly, and they're really good at hiding from humans and predators. So this is a great gray owl chick. It can't fly, but it's climbing up the trunk of a tree with its strong claws. And this is what it looks like from the back. So you can see how the feathers on the young chick look almost exactly like lichens or bark of this tamarack tree. So they really do blend in to their surroundings. And when you're at a certain distance from them, you see the chicks doing this tall, thin display when you approach them. So they're trying to look like a broken branch. I'm not sure if they think that, but their behavior helps them remain unfound. They're quiet, they don't move. But when you get closer than a certain distance, a couple of feet, their reaction changes. They invert their wings, they hiss, they snap their bills. And if you get a little bit closer, they'll actually jump at you and grab you with their sharp claws. They put up quite a good fight. So this is what I would call a kind of a preteen great gray chick. It can barely just start to fly, but it's very, very downy in the head. And here is a teenager great gray owl who is almost ready to get kicked out of its territory, but the parents still feed them. You'll notice that the little white and black patch under the bill hasn't erupted from the facial disc. And once that pattern of feathers is apparent in this chick, that's when the parents stop feeding it and kind of kick it out of the territory. So to study them, we look for them at the nest sites. We walk through the swampy tamarack bogs where the great grays seemingly prefer to nest or adjacent to them. And we have to sit quietly and wait for the chicks to call. And the chicks give a call like steam escaping from a pipe. Kaka. A little bit like a barn owl. And when we imitate the calls of the adults, the chicks call. Then we can find them, we band them. Those are the easy ones to get. And then when they're older, we have to round up the chicks. We put them on a log and we put them beside our lure bird, which is an unreleasable raven. This one has a broken wing. And we wait for the adults to come back with food. The adults come back and they see this and they are out to kill that raven. We have to protect the raven from the adults. Here's the female coming in, and she comes in so strong that we just can often grab her out of the air with a hand net, or if she lands on a branch, just grab her feet. and we weigh them, we measure them, we age them. We sex them too, even though we know it's easy to sex them in the in the summer, because females have a brood patch, a spot where they lose their feathers on their breast. And but in the winter, when we catch them, we wanted to get a measurement that we could say this is a male, this is a female. And it turns out this foot pad, the length of the middle toe to the extended hind toe, the fleshy part, that is definitive. So this is just over 70 millimeters, and that is a female. So we've learned from the summer birds where it's easy to sex them, and then we apply that measurement to winter caught birds in the winter. For aging them, you can see here on the right, the feather tips of these major primaries and secondaries. They all have a light colored buffy tip. Those are the feathers they have in their first year of life, and they retain some of these feathers for up to 4 years. This bird on the left has a variety of aged feathers. You can see the fresh ones are dark, almost dark gray, and then you've got various degrees of fading, like this browns, and then you've got some extremely worn feathers like this really pale brown, and you can see the white areas of the feather are starting to really fray. So we know this bird has no juvenile feathers. That means this bird is 4 years old or older. And with cameras today, you can take pictures of flying great gray owls and you can age them. So this is a juvenile. It probably hatched that previous spring. And you can see the light colored tips on all the flight feathers and on the wing, and a little even bit on the tail. And in contrast, here's an adult. It's got no light colored tips on any of its feathers, wing feathers, and the tail. So this is a bird that's 4 years older, 4 or more years older. We did a lot of studies back in the 80s and 90s on using radio telemetry. Here you can see a little backpack transmitter. We'd catch a bird and tag it and release it within about 18 minutes. Here's one flying. You can see the little antenna coming off its back. And we could track each bird because it had a unique frequency. And they got so used to us tracking them. This is a radio marked bird down in the Roseville bog that we would walk out to check on. The bird would look at us and going, oh, it's just you guys, and then fall back asleep. We would be about 15, 20 feet away. So they got used to us quite readily. We tracked their home ranges, and here's we're tracking it on the left here, standing on top of the Jeep. And then the right is a typical home range for a great gray. You can see some boggy, open, wet areas where meadow voles like to live. And of course, they need a forest for the nest structure. So usually these areas are adjacent to some mature forests with some stick nests. And that would be a typical natural habitat for a home range of a breeding great gray. So we looked at developing forest management practices that would help them, and traditional woodcuts or logging areas would have these straight linear edges you can see here. And so these aren't really great because a great gray owl hunting along the edge could be seen by a predator like a great horned owl. And great horned owls proved to be one of the major predators of great gray owls, especially in years when there wasn't a lot of snowshoe hare or grouse. So we recommended that when they're doing clear cuts or selected wood harvesting, that they create these irregular edges. And you can see here on the right and on the left some examples of that. And so it was a way of creating habitat that great gray owls could use to catch meadow voles adjacent to forests, but in a way that reduced the risk of predation by things like great horned owls. When the small mammal populations crashed, the owls had to get out of Dodge. The ones that didn't migrate away died of starvation, and the ones that did migrate survived. And some of them went hundreds of kilometers within very short periods of time. So these are birds that have settled on some subsequent summer home ranges further north and northeast. So we want to know, okay, well, what about the diet of great gray owls in other parts of the world? So at the time we looked at the available information, and it turns out that Manitoba, and this actually includes Minnesota, are very similar to Fennoscandia, Sweden, Norway, and very close to Western Canada and Alberta, and then Alaska. So this group of population of great gray owls are eating very similar prey items, mainly meadow voles, but they're quite different from the great gray owls in Wyoming, California, and Oregon. And the reason being, their diet is different down there. So you might recognize this familiar icon. This is Half Dome in Yosemite, and it kind of, I may be biased, but it kind of looks like the face of a great gray owl to me. But maybe I'm just a little biased. Anyhow, we went down there to visit great gray owl habitat, and Jeff Maurer, he brought us up to some of the breeding habitat in the montane regions of Yosemite. And here's Patsy skiing into one of these areas. And Jeff pulled out one of his avalanche probes and measured the snow thickness here. It was 27 feet thick, huge. So the owls cannot survive here. They can't catch food under that thick a snow cover. So their migrations there, they behave a little different. They don't go very far like the owls in Manitoba did, but they just go down slope. You can see here across the valley this little clear cut or opening, I should say, and they migrate down slope to these openings, snow free, and then they migrate back up in the spring to nest where the snow is really thick once it melts. We went down to this little meadow. Here's Jeff standing there, and there's signs of rodent activity, but they're not meadow voles. They're pocket gophers. So the great gray owls there are eating pocket gophers. They can catch them under the soil. And that's how they have a different migration pattern than the ones in the boreal forest. Great gray owls here are always on the lookout for food. It's one of the few owls that hunts regularly during the day. And you've often seen little tracks from rodents on the snow surface, and the great gray owls certainly react fast when a vole or a rodent pops up and runs across the snow surface. They fly directly in and just grab them off the surface. Now, if you've looked at the snow closely, you might notice little holes in the snow where the voles make these ventilation shafts. And what they're doing is they're tunneling up through the surface. They might be getting seeds. They might also be venting carbon monoxide building up at the ground level under the snow. And you can see little signs of poop here in the tunnel. And the owls know about these holes and they sit like ice fishermen, almost staring at them, waiting. And when a vole pops up, they're quick to just grab it off the surface from one of these holes. So it's quite fun to watch them do that. But one of their specialties is actually catching voles deep under the snow. And we were very curious about how they do that. This is down at the base ground level, deep under the snow. You can see way down there, it's called the Pukak layer. It's about 0 degrees all winter down there. It can be minus 30 above the snow. So the voles are enjoying a nice warm area, lots of food, and they're protected from predators except for things like the great gray owl. So here's a series of photos that was sent to me by a photographer in Minnesota, and a great gray owl snow plunging. It's quite a remarkable behavior to see. Of course, they're able to do this because they've got one of the biggest facial discs of all the owls, and it's an incredible hearing aid that helps focus very weak sounds into their ear. There's the ear structure of a great gray owl. It's quite complex. If you part the feathers and look at them, you can actually see the back of the eyeball here. That's the actual ear opening. And they've got these, one of the most extremely modified feathers that help them fly quietly, which is important so they can hear voles while they're flying, but also so the voles don't hear them. And these features are that serrated leading edge on these feathers, the serrations at the trailing edge, but also especially the deep pile fuzzy surface on the feather structure. So when the feathers rub against each other, they're very quiet as they're flying. No one's ever measured how quiet great gray owls are when they fly. So Christopher Clark from California has come up in the last few winters with some very expensive equipment, and with our expertise at bringing owls in, we do this. We lure them in to catch them, to ban them under permit. We set up these microphones to record how little sound and what frequencies the owls are actually making. So that's an experiment that's kind of still going. We're especially interested in their hovering flight. And so here's a male owl coming in to my lure, and we're recording how their hovering sounds. I'm just gonna pass over this slide, I think. Oh, okay, thanks. So to figure out what sounds great gray owls are hearing and how they hear, we kind of had to make a fake great gray owl face. And well, it's used has other applications as well, but it's essentially a sound camera. And there's an array of over 60 microphones in this pattern, these tiny dots. And in the middle of this board is an actual lens, like a camera lens. So what the computer does is it takes the sound signals from all these little microphones, combines them, and turns it into a visual image of what the sound looks like. So Chris and I, we trudged out into the areas where the great gray owls were hunting in winter with all this equipment, and we set it up. And sometimes it was so cold the computer would freeze up, and we'd have to warm it up in a car. But here on the left, you can see a great gray owl on a hydro pole, and right at the bottom of the picture is a plunge hole. And so we were going out and actually measuring the snow characteristics and how it influenced what sounds the owls were hearing. And it was quite fascinating. So voles make a number of noises. They make squeaks, high-pitched, high-frequency squeaks, and they also make digging sounds in the snow, which are kind of more broadband and very low frequencies, and chewing on seeds. So they make a variety of noise. And to measure what the voles were making and perceiving what was coming through the snow, one of our experiments was creating this little snowarium, a terrarium with snow, and we put voles in there, and the voles were doing their thing underneath, and we were recording the sounds to try and get an understanding of that. And then we take some of these sounds and we broadcast them through a Bluetooth speaker that was buried in the snow. So this is our kind of mechanical vole sound generator. And we'd have the sound camera here on the left, and you can see on the extreme right, there's a speaker buried under the snow. Once it was buried, we'd cover it all up, and then we would study the sounds coming out of there. And Chris is pointing at here that little blob of yellow and red. That is what the sound camera converting sound energy into a visual image. So because the speaker's unburied here, it's not buried by snow, it's open, the sound is coming right from where the speaker is. You can see it. Okay, what did we do next? We then buried the speaker with progressively amounts of snow. And what we found was that on the lower right corner here, we found quite by accident that snow actually refracts sound. What I mean by that is if you take a glass of water and you put a drinking straw in it, it looks like the straw is bent because the water is refracting light. What's happening here, snow, which is frozen water, is actually bending or refracting sound. So it's creating an auditory illusion. And why is this important? Because the great gray owls have to overcome this. And this is one of the best ways to illustrate it. The vole is actually here where the orange circle is. But the owl flying in at this angle thinks the vole is further because the sound is actually being bent by the snow. So if the owl just went straight for the vole where it thought it was, it would miss it. And the only way they can overcome this illusion is by flying directly overhead and then pouncing straight down. And if you watch great gray owls hunting, sometimes they just go down from a perch right smack into the snow surface. The other thing you notice in the winter, they're perching often high up. And the sounds that we recorded coming through the snow were filtered, and only the low frequency or digging sounds were coming through the snow surface. The higher squeaks don't make it through. And they're very weak sounds. And the owl is perching way up here, and it's farther from the sound up here, and it's trying to pick up a very weak, low frequency sound. So we want to know what was going on there. So we did an experimental setup where we had two speakers, one at 1 meter, one at 4.5 meters. And then we buried the speaker in the snow and we moved further away from the speaker to see what the sound profile looked like. And this experiment, we're just writing up for publication right now. But what you can see on the right side here is essentially the microphone that's at the very top, the top row, doesn't really change as you get further away from the speaker. You can see the same pattern of sound. But the bottom one, as you go further away, the sound has to go through more snow. So it becomes weaker and more filtered. So if you're an owl trying to hear a vole, you want to be high up because more of that sound is coming through. And another way to illustrate that is the top right, you can see this kind of pinkish dome sound when there's no snow is more or less a circular shape. It's emanating from the speaker equally in all directions. But as you pile on more snow, it changes from what they call this circular shape or monopole to this dipole, this oblong shape. And the owl is more likely to hear the sounds if it's higher up and perched at the edge of this dipole. So bottom line is the owls have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years, and we're just trying to understand more about how they're doing that. Other things that come up after many decades of studying owls is I do a lot of school presentations, and there's always a question and answer period, and I get some weird questions from kids like, do owls fart? I don't know. I've never heard one fart. But they also ask questions that we don't have the answers for. Like one kid asked me one time, how fast do great gray owls fly? I said, that's a great question. No one's ever measured it. And then I thought about it. Why has no one measured it? So we went to a school after the kids had been out. We had this long hallway, and we could fly one of our captive tame great gray owl from 10 meters, 20 meters, and 30 meters. And we wanted to do some actual measurements of how fast they fly. So their flight speeds are known now are anywhere from 5 to 7 meters per second with over this course of these three different distances. And there's a nice linear relationship there. The longer they flew, the faster they went a little bit. But the other weird thing, we were looking at how often they flap their wings while they're flying at these different distances. And it was quite steady, actually. It was quite stable. So they were flapping, the number of flaps per second was a kind of a steady state. So they were flapping at a regular rate. They just had more time to build up speed, but their flap rate was the same. And we said, okay, well, this is a captive bird flying in the hallway of a school. How does it relate to wild birds? And we actually looked at video clips of great gray owls flying in the wild, and the flaps per second were pretty similar to between the wild ones and this captive bird. So we're still noodling our heads around some of that data. Some other technologies that have helped our research recently are drones. And normally, as you saw before, we climb these owl nests to check them every spring. Well, I'm 65. I don't know how much longer I can climb trees for, but I still find it fun. But sometimes these trees are really dangerous. They're dead, or they're structures that you don't want to disturb the birds by leaving your smell on them that a predator could follow. So we're very careful about that. But we wanted to compare how invasive flying and checking owl nests with a drone was compared to a human walking up to the nest and climbing it. So we compared the time the female left the nest and when she came back using the human versus the drone. And for great gray owls, the drone is no more invasive or less invasive than a human going to a nest and checking it, but it has the advantage of not leaving a scent trail to the nest. And again, for human safety, some of these nests are darn right dangerous to climb. So here's me operating the drone from a forest. You can see there's a lot of branches. So you be careful it doesn't get caught up into the trees. And this is a great gray nest in an old dead tree. And you can see that there's young in there. And these are usually high resolution images, so you can actually get a little bit closer and then take a photo and then later blow up the photo. Here's a kind of a closer resolution. You can see that there's actually 3 eggs in this nest and another nest with looks like 3 chicks there, if you count the heads. So that's just some of the research that we've been doing. It's kind of exciting as a biologist to continue to learn about these birds after many decades of studying them. And anyhow, I'd like to thank Patsy for all her support over the years, and she's a biologist as well. In fact, my former professor, that old guy at the beginning, he introduced us and then didn't supervise us, so it's his fault. Anyhow, I think that's it. So I've got a couple of videos. I'm going to ask Izzy to put up the master owl catcher in action first, if that's okay. And just while she's doing that, my wife one day said to me, Jim, you're so good at catching owls. Let me make a video of you catching an owl to show the world how amazing you are. I said, well, yeah, sure. So here it is. Okay, we'll do this one first.
This one first? Okay.
This is a different video. It's a video that Nature of Things or Nature Shows made on some of our research on how owls catch their food under the snow.
In the forests of Manitoba, the great gray owl is a master of stealth. Specially adapted feathers allow him to approach in dead silence. His prey is hidden under a thick blanket of snow. To combat the extreme cold, the great gray owl must catch 7 field voles a day. To succeed, he must rely on his most effective weapon, his hearing. Voles need to feed continuously, or they'll freeze to death. To find new supplies of food, they constantly dig tunnels, unaware of the danger above. The owl's large facial ruff, formed of dense feathers, helps amplify sound and funnel it towards his ears. Through half a meter of snow, the sound of scampering feet is inaudible to us.
It's about 18 inches.
To him. With the help of a special acoustic camera, equipped with 60 highly sensitive microphones, we can see what the owl is hearing. This time, he's missed. Despite his acute hearing, hunting in snow is a challenge. It not only muffles sound, it bends it as well. While it appears that the vole is here, it's actually over here. The only way to overcome this acoustic illusion is for the owl to get directly above the vole. where sound is no longer distorted by the snow. As he flies, he tracks the sound as it changes. The closer he gets, the less it's bent by the snow. Until finally, he pinpoints his target. For the great gray owl, acute hearing is essential to conquer the snow and secure a meal.
Oops. It might have been a little choppy.
Do it again.
So these birds come right to us when we're using a live bait like this gerbil. Whoops. So much for the master owl catcher. Anyhow, what happened is I swung a second too soon, and the owl detected the net and outmaneuvered me. And so we banded, I don't know, thousands of great gray owls, many caught in this way. But every winter, I always miss one or two. That's the one that she fell. So anyhow, so yeah, I guess I'm hoping that we have time for some questions, if there are any.
Yeah, we absolutely do. I have a question. Do you then become the owner of several gerbils when you have to have gerbils out as bait?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're very protective of our gerbils, and we take great pains to make sure that they don't get caught.
Yes.
And so they typically live 4 to 5 years, and most of our gerbils, once they become 4 years old, we just let them they retire and they don't have to work in the field, so to speak. And our kids have adopted those senior gerbils and give them a really pampered life afterwards. So
Oh, I'm sure.
yeah, we've had up to 4 or 5 at a time just to rotate them through when we're catching different birds and whatnot. But yeah, they're great. They're better than lab mice because they have fur on their ears, they have fur on their tail. They're a little bit bigger, so they're a little more or a little less sensitive to the cold. But yeah, and of course we follow all the animal care protocols through University of Manitoba, where I'm an adjunct professor. So
Wonderful. And yes, feel free to put your questions in the question and answer portion. We do have a few questions for you already. How long do great gray owls live? One brood per season or ever multiple?
yeah, so there's a general trend where larger birds like larger owls will live longer than smaller owls. So if you think of a great horned owl, it's not as large lengthwise and wingspan wise as a great gray, but they're heavier and they can live up to 40 years. We know great gray owls can live up to about at least to 25, 30 years. Yeah, 30 years would probably be about the oldest they could live in captivity. Um, and then smaller owls like long-eared owls and the smallest, the saw-whet owl, they would, not live nearly as long. I think a long-eared owl known to live about 18 years, and saw-whet owls less. So bigger owls live longer than smaller owls, and the great gray are kind of at the larger end. So around 30 years max. The oldest known wild ones we've caught are in their late teens.
Hmm. Do they make their own nests or do they take over nests of eagles or hawks?
Yeah, they don't make their own nests. Some of the pictures that we saw in the nest cup, you can see a few breast feathers from a great gray. So the females, when they develop their brood patch, which is like an area of bare skin, the feathers from the breast are shed in the spring, and just before they lay eggs, and they line the nest cup a little bit with those feathers, but they really don't make a nest. So they're dependent on structures they find in nature.
Is that common of all owls, or is it specific to the great gray?
It's I think most owls don't make their own nests. They use structures they find. They either use stick nests. Smaller owls will sometimes use cavities by woodpeckers, made originally by woodpeckers, or natural cavities in trees. Um, some like the burrowing owl nest underground, typically in tunnels made by other species, such as fox or badger or ground squirrels. There's some evidence that it might do some digging, but I'm not sure. I don't think any have been recorded digging their own nest burrow entirely. So, yeah. And some nest right on the ground, like short-eared owls. So they aren't really, they're just tramping down grass.
How well do great gray owls tolerate other owl species nesting in their territories?
I think great gray owls have one of the smallest nest territories of all the owls. So they defend an area right around the nest. We've seen dense concentrations of great gray owls nesting in Roseau County, Minnesota, but also in our study area east of Winnipeg. And so they'll defend an area maybe a couple 100 meters or 200, 300 yards around the nest. Other species nest close by, and the great gray owls virtually ignore them most of the time. Um, Northern hawk owls, we've seen them nesting sometimes close to great gray owl nests, and the hawk owls are by far more aggressive, and they'll repeatedly strike at the great grays, to the point where we just didn't go into an area to check the great grays because every time the female flew off the nest, the hawk owls just attacked her. So their great grays are very tolerant.
Um, did you find that one ear is higher than the other, which makes locating food easier?
Yes, thanks. That's a feature a lot of owls have to varying degrees. Some are quite extreme, like the boreal owl, Tegmum's owl, solid owl. They've got quite extreme ear asymmetry, both in the location but also in the relative size of the opening. Great gray owls have some asymmetry, but not as much. But there's asymmetry in some species is in the bone structure of the ear, the opening in the skull. Others are in the fleshy part of the facial disc, so that'll be like our ear flaps. And others, it's a combination of both. So it's quite variable.
That image of the eye in the ear canal, that was crazy how you could see the eyeball in the ear.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't have a skull with me right here, but yeah. If you look up online, you can see the skull of an owl, and the eyes are like tubes. They're
yeah,
very tubular and they stick out quite a bit. And of course, they're so large, there's no room in the sockets for muscles to move the eyes. The owl's eyes are stuck. And if they want to look around, that's why they're often moving their head so much, is they're either listening or they're looking.
um, this is a great question. So many folks are enthralled by the great gray owl that the contact with photographers and owls seems intense. Do you feel this is affecting owls' successfulness in hunting and long-term survival? This question is specifically referencing Sax-Zim Bog in Minnesota. I was actually also there last winter, and there were a lot of photographers there.
Um, yeah, I think that we would hope that most people would behave in an ethical manner. Um, if you're on a road and an owl is hunting along the road, Um, we often recommend people stop at least a couple of telephone poles lengths away, and then the bird that way often it'll move toward you as if you're in your vehicle or quietly standing on the side of the road. And the most important thing is if a bird is moving up changing perches and moving away, I think it's important not to chase it, not to follow it continually. especially if it moves back into the forest, because they are hunting voles. They're trying to survive in the winter, and if we're causing them to expend more energy than they would otherwise, then yeah. So I think there are published um, ethical photography guidelines out there. So it's a great resource for people if they want to go and check it out. And yeah, when we were flying, checking nests with the drones, it worked well for the great gray owls because they returned back to the nest as fast as they did when we checked the nest, and we checked them infrequently. If you had repeated visitations to the nest site, the biggest downside is the trampling and the creation of a pathway that predators could follow. And I don't think that's as big as issue in the winter. But yeah, the owls can at least fly away if they feel pressured and fly back either further down the road or into the forest. It's important not to keep chasing them. Just, wait for that to happen naturally. And I've had a friend who's a longtime photographer, and he'll often just stand quietly. And he's had as many birds fly away as he's had come closer and land, and he's just not moving. And so I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. Do the birds that they have borrowed a nest from ever defend their nest and remove the owl?
Uh, they have found dead great gray owls at the bottom of the nest very infrequently, once or twice. And when dissecting them, they had puncture marks in the back of their head. They'd been struck by another raptor with talons. I suspect that in that case, it was a barred owl on a territory really close by. But the birds that build the nests, no, they don't. They haven't ever displaced a nesting great gray owl, but the owls tend to nest earlier in the year. So when things like broad-winged hawks come back, red-tailed hawks, there's somebody in the nest that they built the year before, they'll just build another nest. In fact, some of these hawks build 2 or 3 nests in one season just to have an alternative nest. Either the males, it might be helpful for them attracting a mate, saying, "Look, I built 2 nests, 3 nests," and the female picks the one she wants. And so by doing that, there's like a bunch of nests around. So if the great grays are in one, the broadwings will build another nest or keep the other ones that they built that weren't used by the great gray and then build, so yeah, they haven't really been displaced by the species that build the nests.
Will a hawk owl also come after a great gray for their nest?
Up for the nest, I think they're just defending their territory against what they perceive to be a predator, avian predator. Even
Mhm.
though the great grays aren't eating hawk owl, even they won't, they wouldn't touch the nestlings, but hawk owls are just super aggressive at the nest. They defend the young. Humans have to be careful if you get close to a hawk owl nest. And the hawk owl pair have a very interesting method of deterring predators. Um, you'll have the female perched up high. She'll swoop down and attack the predator. As she's passing after her attack, the male's up high and he comes down right after her and attacks the predator. So it's like a double pendulum swinging at you. And if you're by yourself, it's extremely dangerous because you don't know where they're coming from next.
Yeah.
So find a hawk owl nest, be very careful, please.
Mhm. Yeah, we were fortunate enough to do a webinar with Hannah as well, who you advised, I believe. And that was really wonderful to hear about her work with the hawk owl. So, yeah.
That was really pioneering work. That was fantastic. It was
Mhm.
great. We really learned a lot from her work.
Kind of a related question. What are the predators of a great gray owl?
Oh, the things. Bald eagles have been known to kill and eat them. Let's see what else. Barred owls, just territorial competition, or they're being territorial. Uh, we've had great gray owls killed by black bears at the nest, and a case where they climbed the tree, ate the young, and then the female was defending the young, and the bear got her and chewed up her. uh, lynx, fisher. Up north, you might get, well, if they're nesting on the ground, they're vulnerable to a huge, like even a fox might grab a chick and run. So, yeah, there's a few things that will take them.
Yeah, that's crazy. I had no idea that a bear would eat an owl chick. So interesting.
They like again the females, that behavior of them eating pellets and feces and regurgitating those away from the nest is interesting behavior. It's likely evolved as an anti-predator strategy.
Hmm. Um, Still taking questions, but I have one final one for you. What has been the most surprising thing that you have learned while researching these owls?
Um, well, I think initially finding out that they uh, they were eating so many meadow voles when meadow voles weren't the most abundant small mammal. And that's a 25-year data set. So it's like it wasn't just like a oddity that happened
Yeah.
one year. That and then their dispersal pattern, how it's very akin to migration. I mean, we think of migration, we think of a robin, migrating in the spring and fall. And the great gray owls, they do migrate and they go, we've had, they're going up to 800 kilometers within 3 months. But it's not an annual migration, it's a multi-annual migration. And it's driven by the dependency on the meadow voles. So they really go through that, 3 to 5 year boom bust cycle. And that I find it's weird that the great gray owls that didn't leave and migrate starved to death. There weren't enough meadow voles, and it's a big owl, but it doesn't seem behaviorally capable of finding alternative prey and surviving as opposed to migrating. So quite different from when you think of a great horned owl or a barred owl, a pair or a bird will stay on a year-round territory year after year after year. The territory will expand in the winter, contract in the summer, depending on prey densities. But they eat almost anything. Like a barred owl is slightly smaller than a great gray, but it eats birds, it eats fish, it eats crayfish, it eats snakes, it eats frogs, it eats cats, it eats all the different mammals that it can secure, and huge diversity of prey. So it's interesting there, the behavioral differences between those species, barred owls and great grays, which are both in the Strix genus. And then most recently, in pairing up with Chris Clark from California, got some really he's really smart. He's got some really expertise on sound biology, and so pairing up his expertise with our knowledge of the great gray owl and trying to figure out how they're catching voles under the snow. I think the weirdest thing we found is the refraction of sound by snow, how it bends the sound and creates this auditory illusion. So the great gray owls not only have to find a weak sound signal that's being filtered by snow, only the low frequency sounds are making it out, but now the sounds are also bent, and so they've adapted this hunting technique of going right above that angle. Essentially is zero, and they're right above it and catching them. So that was a fun discovery, unexpected.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of nice for an old biologist to discover something new and unexpected every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah. I know last year at Saxon Bog, it was like a super year for great gray owls. And I imagine that the meadow vole needs to rebound, that it felt the effects of last year. But yeah, it was wonderful to see.
Yeah, and that's a question we've had too, is like, are the owls actually causing the population of voles to decline? And the answer seems to be not really. It's the vole populations, if you remove the predators, they'll still go through a 3 to 5 year cycle. And
Mm.
it may be related to plant toxicity building up as they eat most of the preferred species, might be
Oh,
affecting their immune systems. So there's like what they call intrinsic versus extrinsic factors. It seems to me more that the population of cycling voles is impacting the great gray owls' presence or absence and migration than the owls are impacting the voles.
oh, interesting.
I find that really interesting. In studying mammals, there's one species of mammal, some of the smaller weasel family, weasels, like short-tailed weasels. They are known to have a depressing effect on vole populations. So when the vole population crashes, if there's a bunch of weasels, they will actually keep the population low for a little bit longer before the voles come up. So that's one species that is thought to have an influence on the vole populations.
We do have one more question here. How old is the oldest great gray that you know of in the wild?
Ooh, well, from our research, when we banded over 2,000 great grays. And so every now and then we encounter them if we recapture them or we find them dead. And there's a band on them, we can determine how long between the banding. And if the bird is a known age when we band it, then we have a really good estimate of its longevity. And so the oldest known female is just over 15, maybe 15 and a half years old. And males are around, I think, 12. But we know from birds in captivity they can live longer than that. So, but it's a harder life in the wild.
Yes. Gotta catch all the meadow voles you can.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you everybody for coming. Um, have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks. If you're ever in Manitoba, come say hi.
Absolutely. All right. Bye-bye.